operations that we do. So as we think about security, especially in the private cloud, we thought about a couple of things. You know, how are we going to deploy it? You know, with the number of data centers that we have, how would you build it for a very heterogeneous environment? So from a deployment strategy, there was a lot of things to think about. Then there was the structure. How do you build it within the DoD network architecture that we have in place that makes it more efficient for the user and accessible through the user to meet those characteristics as defined in his definition? The compliance model, the guidelines, the certification and accreditation, the rapid availability to get certified for your applications, the DICAP, the FISMA. One of the largest things that we have to follow on a yearly basis is not only the FISMA, but SAS 70 guidelines for our financial applications. So we have to make sure those general controls are addressed as we thought about building that cloud. And finally, validation of the security infrastructure, from regular scans to our vulnerability management system and the compliance in accordance with those guidelines. So as we think about this, and so I wanted to make sure I put in context that as I built RACE, it didn't differ from anything else I built in the DISA architecture across all the data centers. So some of the constructs we talked about, like I mentioned, is the architecture. You know, what's the architecture going to look like from a not only a network perspective, but from a gateway perspective between us and the internet, those DMZs that had to be built and still meet the characteristics in the definition, but put that boundary in place. The protection that would be put in place for that, the gateways themselves, and how we're going to make sure that we have sufficient tools for attack detection and diagnosis, cyber opportunities. The protection of the data center itself, not from just simply a network perspective or a data perspective, but from a personnel and human perspective. Operations, as we think about it from an operations perspective, how you build a data center that meets the 24/7 mandate that the department has in building that cloud. So we don't just turn off at 7 o'clock at night. So again, it doesn't change the model from normal data center operations to our RACE implementation. Privileged access. Ours is very different from a public cloud. We require and demand CAP authentication, or two-factor authentication, for our RACE cloud. Even though it's development, it still has some strong authentication requirements for access and usability. And of course, I mentioned regulatory compliance. Those are all the characteristics and constraints that we looked at as we built our RACE cloud, as we built our normal day-to-day data center operations. So I think I was still within the time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So I have a background in IT operations, and I am unabashedly an engineer. So let me give you a different view of the cloud. I see the cloud as thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of computers. Windows and Unix, Solaris and Linux. And I see software stacks with Java and SQL Server and Oracle and DB2. And on top of that, you have application frameworks and you have protocols, legions. You have systems talking to each other, and you have a massive population of users that are no longer in a known place that can access infrastructure from anywhere. And I see your data spread across all of it. So, viewed that way, that's kind of scary. It's very complex. Ultimately, no matter what you call the cloud or how you manage it or what the set of regulations are, you need to be able to see how that infrastructure looks. You need to be able to understand it. You need to be able to compare how those individual components, and there are legions of individual components and protocols and interfaces, we need to understand how they are all configured, and that they are configured according to the standards and the requirements that you set in the face of two things: constant change, because your networks change, your infrastructures change, your requirements change, and these little agents of chaos called end users, which cause many of the problems in the world because you can't control them. So what's my point? Clouds are massively complex systems, and complexity breeds error. And you're running development, I'll tell you this, software doesn't work. We think it does, but you haven't found the problem yet. Very complex systems. We can test them well, and you do your best. What I'm telling you is that to secure infrastructure and secure complex infrastructure, you need to see. You need to see how things are, and you need to be able to fix them when there is a problem. Your ability to react is important. Your ability to see and know is important. The ability to apply a change and understand pervasively where that change got applied and to be audited against that. All these things are incredibly important. So as with any complex system, change is a constant. And that is the fundamental message that I'd like you guys to think about. Cloud brings a tremendous amount of promise in efficiencies by aggregating infrastructure, economies of scale, nimbleness and agility, and being able to turn services on and turn services off. That's a tremendous promise. I think we have a fair ways to go to get at all of that promise. It's still pretty nascent, and people are still trying to figure out what standards to apply and how to build systems in this way and to get the economies. But the bottom line here, I think, from an engineer's perspective, is you need to understand. You need to be able to see. You need to be able to change. You need to be able to react. And that is really, I think, part of the theme of the conference here. It's about continuous compliance. It's not just compliance of the box. It's compliance of the application stack. It's compliance of the connections that your systems have. How do you know what's talking to what? And how do you ensure that in the face of network change that changes don't happen that are unauthorized and that are unapproved? It's a very complex problem. Guidelines and standards are incredibly useful, but you have to apply real systems and real technology and real software and a lot of diligence to make sure that you have secured the environment and constant vigilance.
Yeah.
There's a lot of promise with cloud computing, and there's a lot of pressure for agencies to take advantage of this potential. And as a company, what Booz Allen does, one of the things we do is help agencies think through these issues. They have been coming to us with the question, okay, well, first off, what is cloud computing? And we do sync up with NIST as far as the definition. So we're trying to, stay the course and hold the rudder. Because many times they don't really understand what it is beyond the hype. And then it's like, well, are we ready? And what can we use in this, this concept? And in some cases, their organization is just not mature enough. You can look at it, break it up into different pieces where you're looking at the application aspects, the data, security, and you can determine their level of maturity as an organization as to whether or not they are ready to take advantage of a cloud computing environment or not. And then there are all these different options. And what makes the most sense for them, whether it be infrastructure as a service or platform as a service or software as a service, or do you want to use a private model, or community, or public, or some kind of hybrid? And the choices are not clear-cut for any one organization. It's not going to match everybody. So you have to think through those different issues. So some of the things that I want to highlight, to a large extent, I think it's all about the data. I think you're placing your data into the cloud environment.